Hi, welcome back to Plan9Crunch. I'm Joe Gibson, and every week we like to read something here, usually just a page, but also give some context, easier content, hopefully enlightening. Anyway, what I have before me now is something that us kaiju fans have had to wait a long time to get our hands on in English, and once again, this translation comes from Jeffrey Angles of University of Minnesota Press. He gave us this just a little bit ago, Godzilla and Godzilla Raids Again, the original novels. So the ISBN for this book, that is very new, we'll have the link to the Amazon page here, 978-151-79-20012. If you're not deep into the kaiju genre, you might not know that Mothra had a book. In fact, Mothra had a book that predated the film, that the film was based on, in fact. However, it's a bit more complicated than that. As you can see here, there are three authors. Shinichiro Nakamura, Takehiko Fukunaga, and Yoshi Hata. There's three parts of this very, very short novel treatment. They each took a part, and they were each prolific writers in their own right that were commenting on the socio-political narrative of the times, because this is after World War II, it's 1961, so getting into the Cold War stuff, and there's a fear of getting involved in the Cold War because they're right next to the guys that are waging it. I believe Yoshi Hata was the most politically active of these, and that is the most far left, and he wrote the last little bit that involves Mothra's rampage throughout the world, including Japan, but also Rosilica, I guess not really portmanteau, it was in the original Japanese, of Russia and America, which in and of itself is a very interesting comment, that they're like the same entity as far as Japan is concerned, and how they are exploiting Infant Island. But sorry, jumping all around the place. I'm assuming you already know the plot of Mothra. Right now, if you don't, it's free on YouTube movies, primetime movies, with ads if you have regular YouTube. You got YouTube Premium, though. No ads. And then you can also read this to compare it. There's a few particular areas where everyone's talking about how this is different than the movie, and how it's so useful to have this to see what the original thoughts were on Mothra as a character. In this, the Luminous Fairies, there's more than two of them. Everyone's talking about that. And there's a different, more elaborate on creation myth that mirrors some Japanese folklore in like the second chapter of this thing. In the third chapter, Mothra's ending is very, very different. And everyone's talking about those things. I will read Mothra Coming Ashore, and that's going to come with its own talking point that everyone's talking about. But first, if you want to learn more about this, there's really only so much that I can say, but Jeffrey Angles, the translator here, has gone on the record on other channels to say the stuff. Donnie Winter got a back blurb here. He interviewed Jeffrey Angles on this show. And then also the Kaiju Kingdom podcast, I watched their interview to prepare for this episode. I'd recommend that as well. Really, anywhere you can find him, this is a very interesting project, and it's fun to hear him talk about it. All right, so, as you know, Nelson, the villain of this movie, kidnaps the Shobijin and brings them back as a show, and Mothra goes to rescue them. So, let's see, page 39. After coming ashore at Shichirigahama, Mothra had crossed over the mountains of Inamarugasaki to the great Buddha of Kamakura. As the four fairies sang its name, however, Mothra suddenly changed direction and sped out to sea once again. That night, the destruction was limited to the city of Kamakura. Chujo and Fukuda surmised this was because of a heartfelt entreaty by the Airana, who wanted Mothra to spare the country as much destruction as possible. The following morning, the Rosilican embassy issued a statement. The nations of Japan and Rosilica have already concluded a treaty, currently in effect. to ensure mutual peace and security for both of our countries. We believe that in such explicit urgent circumstances as these, the treaty ought to be invoked. Moreover, reports have been circulating based on reliable information about the fact that this deplorable turn of events has to do with the personal private property of Mr. Peter Nelson, who is a Rosilican citizen. Therefore, as a freedom-loving nation that believes it is the right for individuals to own their own private property, we believe that the treaty should be invoked to uphold this fundamental principle. The 700th Fleet Division and the 500th Air Force Division will soon ellipsis. From there forward, the statement described the planned military deployment. However, it wasn't long before Mothra headed back to land once again when word reached town that the gigantic larva had landed again. There weren't very many demonstrators at the hotel yet, making it possible for 2 large cars to slip away from the back entrance. The cars were not headed for the Haneda airport, but for an airstrip in the northern reaches of the Tokyo metropolis. Mothra stretched out the joints of its 8 massive legs and bent its extremely supple body forward as it scuttled with terrifying speed along the Keihin Expressway toward the heart of Tokyo. Neither bullets nor shells pierced its body. The damage was far less than anyone had expected. He proceeded down the highway, but it was only once he reached the vicinity of Kasumigaseki that he started to engage in any active way. With the surrounding buildings. As soon as his front end reached the Japanese dye building, he ceased moving. Meanwhile, large jets flew overhead. Once halted, Mothra began to spew threads of silk from what appeared to be silk glands inside his gigantic mouth, starting with the 3-stage transformation from silkworm into pupa, and then into adult. Mothra spit out an astonishingly large amount of fibrous material, covering the tower and both wings of the dye building, creating a silken cocoon. As you'll notice, I kind of highlighted some of the pronouns referred to as Mothra, and here is the translator's note at the bottom of each of these pages. Until now, no pronouns have revealed anything about Mothra's gender. For that reason, this translation has, to this point, used the gender-neutral it. Suddenly, Hata introduces here the male pronoun kare, he. The male pronoun appears 4 times in this paragraph and the next. And then jumping over to the bottom of page 41, after some more material we haven't read yet here. At this point in the text, when the larva forms a cocoon, the male pronouns mysteriously disappear again, and no pronouns appear anywhere from here to the end of the novella. On the next page, he explains, popular discourse, both in Japan and America, has typically treated Mothra's final form as female, and that is indeed true. Mothra is regarded as the premier female kaiju, even over Gorgo. And it's weird to see it and he being used to describe. I suppose there was a male Mothra in the Rebirth of Mothra trilogy, but even that was controversial in its own right. I mean, not controversial, but confusing because some of the exports referred to Mothra Leo as a she, and anyway. From this point on, the translation will follow that tradition and use she, her pronouns wherever English requires a pronoun or possessive. And then he'll explain this choice even more in the translators afterward, which is also a major draw of this book. But yeah, it's really interesting to see how Mothra began, because they always knew there's going to be a movie when they were writing this. They were just writing a short little treatment for the movie to expound upon and change some things. And that's what people are talking about, is that those changes, including, and that I don't want to spoil it. Anyway, this is a very important book for us kaiju fans. However, there is just one thing about this. This is a very thin thing here. This part is the story, the 3 chapters of the Mothra story. It's 44 pages. This part is the translators afterward. And both sides are very interesting. There's also this much is the notes and citations. So that's quite a bit as well. The issue here is that the MSRP for both of these seems to be $20, $19.95 specifically. I'm not going to give a blanket recommendation that any of you that have any kind of monetary problems in this troubling time, put it all on $20 for this. Now granted, this is on discount currently as I'm recording this anyway. It should go up pretty soon after that. $15 is far more fair, and for $15 it's an invaluable resource into kaiju storytelling, but also that period's history. And this is even a pretty approachable analysis of these three authors and the translator's decision and the art of translation. If I were given this to read in a class about linguistics, translation, comparative literature, I would very much enjoy it. This would make for a very interesting assignment, I think, as well. And this is coming out now because of issues with the estate of some of the authors. However, also, 2026, per Toho, is the year of Mothra, celebrating her 65th anniversary later in the summer. They're shafting Rodan. It is his 70th anniversary in December. He always gets shafted. Still, this sets the tone for a year of Mothra. We're going to get the volume release for Mothra, Queen of the Monsters by Matt Frank, a comic artist, in just a few days now. And maybe Mothra will appear in -0. I don't know. There's been nothing else announced, so if they want to really commit to the year of the Mothra, then they'll put her there. In any case, I recommend this very highly. It's a very good book. Here at Plan9Crunch, we try to have these out every week. Sometimes we aren't able to. We also do reviews of other things and scene bites, podcasts, maybe more podcasts, so you'll see soon enough, possibly. And follow us if you will. We also have a TikTok page, a Facebook page. We have a conventional blog. Look into all those as you will. Thank you all for watching. That's a wrap.